And what about, I should have had you on that, you know. I gotta go. Well,
Stupid allergies. Oh my.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is a special work session with the Colorado River District. Today is May 20.
It's ready.
Oh,
Yep, we're
yeah.
going. No, the audio's not working. Uh-oh. Because it's green.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Okay.
Want me to
Thank you.
start over? This is a special work session with Colorado River District, May 29th, 2025, starting the meeting at 10:07. This work session will be streamed live on the RBC YouTube channel. Work sessions are intended to provide opportunities for the commissioners to study difficult issues, gather and analyze information, clarify problems, or give staff direction. No official decisions will be made. There will be no public comments during this meeting. We are at the Rio Blanco County Historical Courthouse, 555 Main Street, 3rd floor, hearing room, Meeker, Colorado, 81641, and virtually. We're here to discuss several critical matters concerning the Colorado River. Potential topics include in-stream flow, dredge and fill, the Colorado River Compact, Colorado's prior appropriation doctrine, and emergency declaration and curtailment. And so we need to move on to line item 5.
So if I understand it right, we don't need to go into executive session for a little bit.
Okay,
I think these gentlemen are happy to visit with us about our first couple of topics first before we go into executive session.
perfect. Do you guys want to come on up here?
That,
Again,
have somebody there.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, and good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Andy Mueller. I'm the General Manager at the Colorado River District. And this is Peter Fleming, our General Counsel. Very much appreciate the invitation to come up and talk. Always wanted to do that. I'm very interested in staying engaged with Rio Blanco County. As I think you're aware, but just for the members of the public, we're a government agency that was created back in 1937 at the request of the citizens of Western Colorado. We were created by the General Assembly to advocate and lead for the protection of the water resources of the Colorado River and its major tributaries within the state of Colorado for the benefit of our inhabitants and the environment within our 15-county region. But we are also charged with protecting our state's interest in the Colorado River Compact. So we have a broad charge. We are based in Glenwood Springs. We have 25 employees, mainly engineers, but some lawyers and admin folks and government affairs people. You have the pleasure of having one official lawyer for the district and one who has a law degree and still licensed, but not practicing.
a recovering one.
Sorry about that.
Makes my job that much harder.
He doesn't question anything, right? Well, all right. Thank you, guys.
Well,
So-
we're happy to talk about these issues as you want to maybe lead the conversation, and I know you have questions on a number of different issues, so we're happy to address them and engage with you and make sure that we're ideally on the same page of this issue.
Sorry, I would just add that, Andy and I do this water stuff, every day, and sometimes it can seem like talking in code to people that don't do it every day. And so please, no question is prohibited at all. If we're talking, with language that seems foreign, please let us know, and we'll happy to chat. Hopefully we can have a good informative discussion.
Perfect. Okay, there we go with it. So let's start with our wonderful dredge and fill. And just maybe if you want to give just a little bit of history for the public's perspective. And I think, have you guys met Reese? Is our, yes. So, and so Reese has been helping us engage on that a little bit and so forth. And I believe been working with Rebecca, right? Is that on dredge and fill you were doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we appreciate her help, but just kind of an overview there.
Our office has been great. I think she's very knowledgeable. Probably should have brought her up here. So actually,
No.
but the way that we have approached the dredge and fill, we sometimes refer to it as 404 because that's the section number under the Clean Water Act. The federal government historically is used to regulate the dredge and fill of waters of the United States, sometimes abbreviated as WOTUS. I can't remember the exact year, but several years ago, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in the Sackett case that substantially narrowed from prior interpretations the scope of WOTUS, what is waters of the United States, and therefore what is subject to regulation under that section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Following that decision, the state of Colorado proposed to regulate, for dredge and fill purposes, virtually all state waters. All state waters were all waters that were not WOTUS waters of the United States. And the state had never done that before. The state had been content, I suppose, with the United States regulating the dredge and fill of waters within the state. And when that got narrowed, the state of Colorado decided, well, we're going to now regulate those waters, especially the waters that are what we call the gap waters that were no longer regulated under the more narrow interpretation under that SACIT. Not last year, but I think the year before, I can't remember now, the state then proposed legislation to implement this the state's regulation of dredge and fill. And when it first came out, drafts that we saw, we thought, hey, it's because the river district, as Andy said, we're 15 counties. We have constituents on all sides of this issue, from the headwaters counties down to the state line. And we were trying to balance those competing, not competing, but divergent maybe interests within the district's boundaries. But we took the position sort of informally that it's one thing to regulate waters that, state of Colorado that were formerly regulated under the pre-SACIT interpretation. I suppose state, if that's what you want to do as a governmental entity, okay. It's another thing to go beyond that and regulate waters that were never under the Clean Water Act jurisdiction. And that's what they were trying to do. And so we were trying to sort of stay consistent with that, only regulate what used to be covered, don't go beyond that. We fought to, and I think we were successful in doing that in the bill. And we also fought to include the ag exemptions, make sure those carried forward in a way where ag users that were exempt from dredge and fill activities under formerly, regulated pre-SACIT waters would not be subject to regulation under the state's new regulatory frame. And I think we were successful in that. That said, the state is now going through the rulemaking process to adopt rules for the state law. And I don't think that the formal rules have been proposed. The rulemaking process itself has not, the formal process has not been initiated, at least to my knowledge, but will be soon. The drafts are out and they're taking comments and things like that on the drafts. We've also said, hey, to the extent that you're regulating beyond what was the pre-SACIT waters, and anything that previously was covered by what was termed a nationwide permit. It was kind of it was still considered a regulated activity, but you didn't have to go get your own permit. You didn't have to, wasn't a burdensome process. But we're trying to make sure that anything that's new that comes in or that was previously covered under that type of authorization continues to be covered under that to make it less burdensome from your perspective. That's sort of a summary of where we are at on that process and what I think we believe our charge is. Well, the River District's Board of Directors, in some ways it would be great if we could, strike a pen and get rid of the whole thing, but I don't think that would be successful in today's political environment in our state. So we're trying to make the best of what.
And I would just add, from the district's perspective, introducing a new state agency and a new regulatory scheme is problematic anytime you do it. And so you got CDPHE where this was nested in according to the law. And, they don't have a great track record with their water quality. It's slow, it's backed up, it's cumbersome, it's transactionally very difficult and expensive. It creates regulatory uncertainty. And so we expressed those concerns and all the way along to the process. we continue to express those concerns. We think that that it is unlikely that the implementation of these regulations is going to go well. And we're just pretty pessimistic that this is a positive outcome for our water. But as Peter says, we unfortunately deal with political realities, right? So it's moving forward. And so, our board has given us direction over the years that it is much better to engage and be productively at the table and try to, from that perspective, make sure we make regulatory environments the least harmful as possible. And so it's a little bit like reading tea leaves, but it's trying to figure out how to engage. And Peter mentioned it, but the ag exemption is written into the Clean Water Act. It's not written into state law, right? So
Exactly.
we pushed very hard to take an interpretation of the ag exemption that was actually issued under the George W. Bush administration and get that embedded into the state regulatory scheme. And we believe that that's actually what's in the statute. Now, making sure that that translates into the regulatory environment, what we're trying to do and trying to stay on top of. But we'll tell you that engagement led to their staff at the CDPHE's eyes being open. They had no idea that there was even an ag exemption when they started, right? And then we gave them the information and we showed them, here's some very reasonable approaches to it, and this is where we think it should go. And there's tested law on this, and you should do something that has some reliability and precedent. They did do that so far, but every so often you have to kind of push them back into the lane, and that's what we hope we're doing, and certainly want to work with our constituents to make sure we can operate in that arena.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
To build on what Andy was just saying, if at any time you think, boy, this is a really big issue for the county, or we're confused, why is the River District taking this position in that process? Please contact us. Please contact us. Happy to. Sure, we're serving all of our constituents.
I might ask it. Al, do you have anything? Don't hesitate to speak up back there.
I do. The only thing that I'll add to it is when the legislation came about, they talked about the Rapinos portion. And that's where this policy was supposed to mirror that Rapinos piece. This now exceeds Rapinos. And to me, this exceeds what the legislation had voted on. And I don't think the state employees care about that. But perhaps our state legislatures would, because this is not what they voted into law. This exceeds the law that they wanted to have imposed upon the state.
And if I could, just speak to that a little bit, and to the extent that the state's interpretation is pushing into waters that were not even regulated under that prior guidance, which was a Supreme Court case that Al mentioned called the Rapinos case. That was before the Sackett determination that narrowed the federal scope. That's where we've said, if you're going to regulate that, you have to do it under a nationwide type of permit where people don't have to, spend a lot of time and money really at all. You simply have to implement best practices. And I think they're doing some definition of best practices in the rules. I can't recall off the top of my head, what those are, but Al, you're right that they're reaching beyond that Rapinos standard. But again, our position's been, if you do that, you have to make it easy on the regulated community. Rapinos, I'll take the opportunity just to tell this is a lawyer story, so it's
It's all good.
The Rapinos decision was a Supreme Court decision. it basically came up with this test as to what was WOTUS, what consistent waters of the United States. And it was called a significant nexus. If the water had a significant nexus to navigable waters, then it was considered to be waters of the United States and therefore regulated. And so everybody said, well, what is a significant nexus? The other thing about the decision was that term significant nexus, I think it was Justice Kennedy, who was in that case, the Supreme Court was split 4-4-1, and he was the one. And so Kennedy was the one who came up with that significant nexus test, so that you had a majority of one that basically set that standard under the Rapinos test. And there was another case that was called upon to interpret it and said, the judge in that case said, I would compare the Rapinos decision to sausage making, but that would demean sausage makers.
Yeah. And I think you're aware that, every change in administration brought this whipsaw at the federal level in terms of what was regulated, what wasn't, how it was regulated. Some of them, you could like a lot because they were getting out of the business of nitpicky regulation. Others were more expansive. And it's interesting as after the more recent Supreme Court decision, our state, and this is a hard thing and I will admit that I had not focused on it before, but our state had a definition of state waters that was incredibly expansive in the statutes already. And so it wasn't a new concept that there were it just said, here are the state waters. It's all waters that arise within the state, essentially. So it wasn't tied to interstate commerce, and which is where the federal jurisdiction comes from. And that's why those navigable rivers are so important. Just state waters, and then it said, but we have the authority to regulate it, but we're not going to, because we're going to rely on the federal policy. And then when the feds dropped out of the gap, we all thought, okay, well, no, they'll probably move to go into that gap. And that's when that expansion of creep is now occurring. So I do think, nationwide permits and they're statewide, they're regional permits under the federal regs. Here we would just need a set of very reasonable blanket exceptions where, as long as you're following their guidelines, you don't have to apply for a permit and get permitted. Some of their stuff to me makes no sense that we've seen in the regulations, like, oh, you have to reapply for a Clean Water Act permit every 5 years. Well, if you build a dam that has significant wetlands mitigation and which almost every dam does, associated with it, what happens if you build the dam and 5 years later some bureaucrat says you no longer have your permit?
Yeah.
And the state's like, oh, we didn't mean that. I'm like, yeah, you did. So that's somebody on staff actually meant that. The agency itself and certainly the lawmakers behind the bill didn't want that. But so that's where I think Al is completely on track, that there's just, I believe there's a human nature in some folks that just wants to regulate, wants to create. And so, our job is to kind of make sure that we keep pushing back against that. And it's one of these jobs, unfortunately, that will never be done, right? Because there will always be somebody pushing to creep into bigger regulation. And so I think it's important that you all and we all work together to make sure that we're focused and we understand.
I guess I'm just thinking so going forward, how can we be most productive in helping you fight the fight? And we'll look to Reese to be the one. to make it happen.
I would say,
And Al's been very helpful. I mean,
Al-
that's really
Al is
good.
fantastic,
Yeah.
and an advocate, by the way, on our board for Rio Blanco County for the issue matter. I can assure you that every member of our board and every member of our staff knows what's important to Rio Blanco County. Al is very
That's important.
and I mean that as a compliment. No, it's sometimes we have board members who don't say anything and don't wonder, well, what does their county want? What can we do to help? We actually do.
We know.
We know. That's really good.
I'm
So,
glad to hear this.
so no, it has very effective arm. But I would say, we've got Rebecca involved in it, as our point, lead, but we also have our Deputy General Counsel, Jason Turner. And so the two of them, along with our Government Affairs Director, Zane Kessler, are really kind of the tip of our team, but we all back them up. And so, Reese, I imagine you have, it sounds like Rebecca, but if you haven't had an opportunity to meet Jason, we should make that happen. That he really is one I lean on for some of our legal, regulatory stuff in the clean water. I would love to have that and make sure that happens.
Absolutely. I would appreciate it.
Yeah, go ahead, Al.
I guess I have
Okay.
one more follow-up. I'm disheartened by learning that we were sold a bill of goods legislatively on the rules they were going to mirror and the gap, and how state employees have the audacity to impose their own rules being influenced by outside organizations. And that's absolutely happening right now in the situation. And I don't think our state legislature, maybe I don't have a lot of faith in their direction right now. But I don't know if they're fully aware that what they adopted legislatively is not what's being imposed right now. You got apples and oranges here. I didn't like it before. I definitely don't like it now. And the game is changing, and you're seeing the state's colors through their staffing change the legislation based upon how they want to see it done. And it's based upon a preservation mentality. I'm really chasing people away. But I think engaging our legislators from you and asking why the state employees, why the state agencies are now exceeding what you created on the legislation. And that may help kind of bring this a little bit back home. But it's going to take an aggressive push, I believe, on those state legislatures to kind of maybe shake up these state agencies, even if they can. Some of these state agencies don't really care.
Do you have a list or ideas of the correct legislators to push on?
I would start with your locals,
Yeah,
because they voted in favor of it. And also Karen McCluskey. She was the one that actually brought this thing forward and became a flag bearer of that. And those are the people that I don't have a full list, Commissioner, but I can help you get that. But I think that conversation needs to be had with. That's what I find extremely frustrating, is how we've seen it on multiple examples where the state develops regulations and then the legislature does, but then state employees do what they want to do anyway.
they've been concentrating on other issues and it's gotten away from them.
Yes. And I think they did what they felt was good, which is a knee-jerk reaction yet, but I don't think they know what the state's doing. And when I visited with Dylan Roberts last year, he's pretty rational. And Dylan told me if I see a problem like that, then I need to let him know. I let him know on multiple occasions. And I think even the River District having a visit with Mr. Representative Senator Roberts, let me get that straight. It would be helpful. But even through other organizations and affiliates that you have as well. This 404 thing is an ugly monster that's going to control your land use development throughout the state. It flat out will. Because that's what the Army Corps does today as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting time when the water user community actually favored having federal regulatory authority over the state. I mean, very weird situation, but it's across the board. Doesn't matter if you're agricultural, rural, industrial. You'd much rather have the feds, and it's a little strange to say that, right?
It's not as strange as you might think, because they're doing that in a lot of areas.
I'd say oil and gas is right there with you.
Okay, fair enough. So, but But I do think Senator Roberts is receptive. We have talked to him about our concerns and had him reach out to the head of CDPHE and their regulatory unit and really push back, I think. So I do think that, Al's point is a good.
Okay. So just need to keep moving in that direction. So, okay. All righty. Anything else from that?
Don't think so on that one.
So let's see. What I say, what was our next one?
It was,
And flow.
Yeah.
That's,
Oh, that favorite. I guess it used to be the favorite. Maybe it's getting outdone. So I just might say, and I've been frustrated with in-stream flows for a very long time, as you guys probably can remember. I guess we, coming from the conservation district, we have had, the state agency come and talk to us, but when you talk to those that are having to deal with them, it all sounds like it's a great tool. It won't hurt anybody. And then we have these other scenarios. One being, and I'll just go back to an example that we had again when I was with the conservation districts, that it was just kind of a concept, an idea that we could let, if the Miller Creek ditch left water in the river for the fish, so to come down to the Highland ditch was about 3-4 miles or so. And then we bring it out there. And yes, since then we've said this is not possible, but, and then pumped it up. I mean, how friendly that would be. I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. Sorry, I'm going back the other way. Took it out of Highland, or was in Highland, take it out in Miller Creek, bring it down Miller Creek, drop it so we could do power generation. So we could help pay for this horrendous cost on those big ditches. There was no, talking with not Western Water, the engineering firm that does all the water stuff around here.
SGM, are they?
No,
Wilson.
the Wilson Water Group. Yeah. Talking to those engineers and others and said, you know what, that sounds great, but there is in-stream flow. Point A to point B. There is no way that the state will ever let that happen because you're pulling a lot of water out above there. So that's just, it's thankfully it wasn't anything that we really, really wanted to do, but it is an example of how it stops some really creative ideas of how we might be able to do things. And I'm very concerned about that. So how can we push back on in-stream flows and really make sure that there's a real need for it, and how do we keep it from stopping development and use of water as we need it? I'm sorry, that's a really big question, but I'm so frustrated with that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I would just say preliminarily and then I'll turn it over to Peter because he's been dealing with this from the district's perspective much longer. But I would say that a lot of our, well-intended environmental regulatory schemes, by locking something into a current state, right? That's essentially what they're doing. This is what we believe is the present state, and we're going to preserve it. And that's the standard when they're creating in-stream flow, is to preserve the minimum amount necessary to preserve the environment. But we all know that the environment changes and things are dynamic out there, and ideas like the hydro power, right, that you're talking about, those are really important potential issues there, right? Potential benefits to the community. And I will say, much like many of our federal land classifications, they don't have that flexibility built in to handle a dynamic changing society, right? And so I don't know that I have a good answer for you.
Come on, Andy. And I know I've asked you it before.
Yeah, but I'm going to turn over to Peter, who I'm sure does. So.
No pressure.
I know I have an idea, but, and we've actually been, I think, partially successful in one or two instances. Similar to the dredge and fill issues, as this, river district with its broad constituent base, sometimes we're in favor of in-stream flows. Sometimes we're opposed. I've been on both sides many times over my 20+ years at the River District. We fought against the largest in-stream flow appropriation in the state, which was on the Dolores River. We unfortunately lost that issue. Joined up with the Southwestern District, our sister district, when that was done several years ago. And we have supported in-stream flows in other instances where there's a benefit to our constituents in the West Slope by preserving the natural environment, by addressing harm to the stream system that has occurred from upstream Trans Mountain water. As you may know, we're involved in this process to acquire the Shoshone water rights and convert those to in-stream flow use. And I'll just point out that is a different beast, if you will, than the appropriation of a new in-stream flow. With Shoshone, we're simply trying to preserve the status quo. These water rights have been on the river for 100+ years. A new in-stream flow, a new appropriation of an in-stream flow by the CWCB, state agency, which is the only entity in the state that can own and use water without the diversionary aspect of a water right, creates a new demand on the river. And what we tried to do and argued for in that Dolores in-stream flow hearing, and we were going up against a pretty powerful political wins as to get that in-stream flow in place. And we argued, well, okay, appropriate the in-stream flow, but build into it some sort of a development allowance where new water that comes online, and it can be just a very small amount, and it normally would be a small amount, can develop. It may not be foreseeable currently, and if it was foreseeable and there was an actual need, somebody could go file a water right on it, get ahead of the in-stream flow and priority. But we know that there will be new demands in the future that we can't foresee today. And so our argument in that case, because it was such a large in-stream flow, was put in a small development allowance, and the CWCB board rejected that. We said that they should have considered that. We lost that issue. We have since successfully, in a much smaller in-stream flow, and successful in getting a development allowance inserted as part of the appropriation. So in other words, if the in-stream flow is 50 cubic feet per second, and it's going to take a 20-25 year priority, the in-stream flow would have would be appropriated with a term that new development of water rights to the tune of however many cubic feet per second could be developed. Maybe it's just even two cubic feet per second, 3 cubic feet per second could be developed without impacting the environmental benefits or goals, without defeating the purpose of the in-stream flow. We were able to get that in a different case, and I think there's reason to believe that we can do that in the future. It doesn't probably solve the situation that you mentioned, commissioners, because of maybe the flow rate was higher in that situation. But I think it will help in situations where the small development that comes along, a small HOA or a farmer that wants to put a pond in for X, Y, and Z reasons doesn't have to, isn't, number one, prohibited from doing so, and number two, even if not prohibited, doesn't have to go through a big process to do that. The CWCB is the board, and the staff probably don't like that concept, but in my mind, at least, the precedent has been set that it's possible. But whether it will happen in other situations, I don't know, but at least they've done it. That's one way to address the lockup, if you will, that Andy mentioned. It doesn't solve all of the problems.
And I think, scrutinizing, and I know you do, scrutinizing new instrument flow filing. Um, really looking closely at science behind it. If there is some science, and there are a number of instrument flow filings historically that were made that went out on the ground and talked to ranchers. That stream's dry.
Mhm.
4 months out of the year. What are they talking about? Or it benefits from a return flow that's actually coming from a different stream. And so it's not native water, but that's where the return from the field is. And that shouldn't be counted as something that can be filed out by the CWC. So there are lots of those issues that you have to get into the specific cases. I do want to just touch on the Shoshone issue that Peter talked about. I want to make it really clear. We're utilizing the tool because it's there, and it's 2.5 miles. It's the shortest stretch possible. There are no intervening water rights, and so it's about preserving the benefit of that call, which is a non-consumptive use of water, to benefit both our upstream and downstream communities. The upstream communities want water in the river so that they can have a robust recreational economy. The downstream communities also recreate, but they also like to make sure they can irrigate their crops and have water for human development. And this 2.5 mile instrument flow works. It's the only non-consumptive year-round water right that exists. So that's why we're looking at trying to add that use to the existing industrial uses. And that's where we're coming from. I realize that when the river district is all of a sudden becoming an advocate for these flows, it's concerning to some people. So I want to make sure that if you have questions about what we're doing there or why we're doing it, I'm happy to talk. But we think we've designed it very well to not injure our water users.
And I don't have concerns with that one, just for the record. It's probably like, but when you talk about the new proposed streams, the ones that are just making no sense to me are those that are in our national forest, but not only in the national forest, but in the wilderness. I just can't it's beyond me why we need to put an in-stream flow on that. Now, the state will tell us it's to be sure to prevent from getting a federal water right on it. But I just don't see that happening. I don't see that issue, especially up here. I mean, I get it in places there's been that, but I don't get it. So I would really like to rely on you guys to help us fight those and be pretty aggressive on that, because I just can't see the value in it. I mean, maybe somebody can help me understand it, but I can't see it. So,
I mean, well, let me first respond to the issue of a state in-stream flow in lieu of a federal in-stream flow. That is one instance where we have supported an in-stream flow, and there's 3 in-stream flows. Well, there's actually 4, more than I can think of, where we've done that. One was on the Dominguez National Conservation Area. Name.
yeah.
And the other is on the main stem of Colorado River between Kremling and Nome. And section flows through Grant and Eagle counties. And in that section, there are 3 state in-stream flows that the river district supported. They were part of a compromise that was proposed by various stakeholders, including the river district, Trans Mountain water users, environmentalists, and so forth, where we said we can provide to manage these resources that had been identified as eligible for designation as wild and scenic under the federal wild and scenic rivers. And we said, well, how about no on that? And instead, they'll have a stakeholder, an alternative management plan that the BLM and the Forest Service will adopt. And the plan has, it's not without controversy, but it has a lot of provisions to it. And one of those provisions was the state would appropriate these in-stream flows on the main stem. And then that you would have this, the BLM would adopt the alternative management plan rather than pushing forward with wild and scenic federal designation and all of the trials and tribulations that could involve. And we supported that. Those weren't way up in the wilderness. So with respect to the wilderness areas, I think that that the feds are done with, the existing wilderness. They're not claiming new, a federal reserve water rights. Those issues have been resolved, to my knowledge. A new wilderness designation, you would have to make sure in the federal legislation designating that wilderness that, it didn't, they agreed not to appropriate or have any federal reserve water right associated with it. But, the argument I hear is, and I see your point, it's in the wilderness. Why do you need an in-stream flow here? And then the people on the other side of the table are saying, it's in the wilderness. Why does it matter? Nobody's developing it anyway because it's in the wilderness. And so, that's the counter here. I don't really know where, where you come out on it. I can see the response on both. But where there is an issue specific to, a water user or whatever, we're for sure, hey, this is in the wilderness, but there's an inholding up here, or there's a pre-wilderness ditch that diverts from those ones. Yeah, we'd want to get involved.
We'll keep an eye on them and holler at you as they come.
Please do.
So, yeah.
The wilderness issue, I do think, just to be flesh that out a little bit more with the creation of new wilderness areas. We have at the district fought, I want to say at least since the 90s, reached an agreement with most of our elected officials who sponsor those bills that they will agree to not have a reserved federal water right associated with that withdrawal, and that they will respect existing water diversions, including conditional rights that are in those areas, and allow for access to those points, even if they're going to be in a wilderness area. And we have some language that was developed, and I think Hickenlooper and Bennett had an act that hit the name or Act or something.
Mm-hmm. It's back, just for the record.
Yeah, I don't think it will be going anywhere in it. It's my guess, but it is. It's still there, right?
Yeah.
So, really scrutinizing the language that's in those drafts and making sure it's consistent with those principles of protecting state sovereignty and our own water users over that area is critical for us. But like yourself, I think it's it seems to me, appears to me to be a waste of state resources.
Exactly. That's my
to file on these in-stream flows in wilderness areas, and so it's odd to me that our state even wants to do that. I don't get it.
Well, we have to remember that BLM is pusher behind that too, from the state office.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah. And so, yeah. Al, it looked like you had a thought.
Yeah, I do. And
Sorry, I'm
Commissioner
just kind of.
Scritchfield, you smell a rat, and you see something that I'm glad you're following your gut instinct. Because there is prime example in Rio Blanco County to where there is an in-stream flow that would use. The rationale behind it was due to oil and gas development back in the 70s. That in-stream flow goes from roughly Jupiter to Paynes Creek. It's 200 CFS. It's what they're considering perfecting. However, they were intending that oil and gas was going to explode and build reservoir sites up there as they were proposed in the 70s. But those projects never came to fruition. But that water right still is in place, and it was one of the earlier ones in Colorado, but it's never been exercised, even when flows were where the White River is essentially empty. There is no flow. So what is the true concern of the state with the in-stream flow program when they have an in-stream flow designation on a fairly significant reach on the White River, but they've never exercised it? Why is that exempt from the abandonment list? It's
Good
perfected
question.
because the water's in the stream. But yet the state's never actually asked for the Division of Water Resources to administer it.
Well, and I guess the
I've
other,
asked you.
No, I'm not, but I'm seeing that there's a disagreement and precedent of how it's being set.
no, and I don't
And that was
disagree.
set there to control growth and usage from that
Yeah.
river. And water has been released from Avery to help support the life cycles in that in-stream stretch. Now, the state will weaponize that in-stream flow rate when somebody wants to develop a project or provide augmentation
I
water.
was gonna say augmentation water is where it occurs.
That is where the state is gonna grab that and they're gonna say, not so fast. You can't do that. That is overlooked, but that is a definite concern and a restraining piece that will have to be used or will have to be considered as projects continue to move forward in our White Basin.
Any questions?
Okay.
I keep
No, I'm
dominating
learning.
the question. I'm
No,
sorry. Sorry.
this is your area. I'm learning.
The only other thing, unless anybody else has got, do you have any questions, Reese? That would be,
Quick question, surface level, so apologies. How is it CPW can propose an in-stream flow and it not come with any recommended flows? You guys mentioned good science and data back behind these proposals. I can't wrap my mind around how that's acceptable. Maybe it's legislative, maybe with agency. That's very difficult from the stakeholder perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I have never seen a recommendation without a flow.
Or it'll say TBD.
TBD.
Yeah.
Right.
Yet to be determined, by the way.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that before the CWCB can initiate their process, which is a very prescriptive statutory process where they give notice a full year before they actually file a water court, they've got to come up with a flow rate. They can't, but I have, to be fair, in my prior practice, run across examples where it's down in the Southwest where there were closed instrument flows, and we first call the CWCB and say, hey, can I get the data that the flow rates that you're talking about? You need to call this guy over at the CPW. They're the ones who say they have the sign. Well, you haven't seen it. No. Call them. Yeah, maybe the BLM has it, and you go around and around and then nobody has it. And that's where we actually have been, where I was previously, I should say, successful in stopping the instant flow process. If they don't have the science and data behind it, they can't move forward. If they don't have evidence of the water in the stream preserving an environment, then they can't move forward. And on that particular stream, I happen to know it was 98% private, and I happen to know all the ranchers. I'm only given access to CPW to get on there and measure. So
oh, there you go.
yeah,
Okay.
so it was a very interesting, discussion. So,
I would say at least my experience hasn't always been 100% of the time, but but generally what they're doing in those instances, they're saying, hey, here's a stream that we're looking at, and we're going to propose this. We're waiting for that science to get the science to determine, whether it's how robust the science is. It's just they're waiting to get the data that they can to support what they think is a stream worthy of protection. That's my sense is what they're doing. And if you get notification of an in-stream flow that it's particularly in the early stages of the process, as Andy mentioned, they have a pretty prescriptive process, and you have a contact, with the staff. They can be pretty good to work. Not always, but will sometimes put things on a slow burner so that water users in the affected area can get a filing in for water court if they need to get a new water right. Again, that's not going to address water uses 30 years down the road that might come up. But if you got something, that you're concerned about, or maybe shortening the reach, we've been successful in doing that in a number of instances, saying, hey, can you shorten it by half a mile here because this ditch, may need to be moved because the head gate is not, great or something to that effect. it can be pretty good to work with. Again, that's not always the case, but if you're having difficulty, please let us know. We can do everything we can to try to address the local issues.
But I do think it's important to, there are a number of exceptions, right? Pre-existing undecreed water rights are senior to an instrument club. You have to be able to establish that, and so I think a lot of this is vigilance and making sure that the local ranchers, that their practices, they may have a diversion on a ditch that's located at a very specific point of diversion, but over a couple generations, they've moved their diversion point, or they've actually swapped a little bit of water down to a different ditch, and they've done that historically. Helping them be able to identify that that's a threat to their ability to being flexible, and therefore go into that in-stream flow. And it's easier if you do it before the CWCB files in court, because if you see that in-stream flow notification coming in, I've gone in and you go in and you talk to them and say, hey, this is a pattern in practice by this ranch on this ranch in particular. Or I even had, ranchers who, and I'm sure you have them in Rio Blanco County who prior appropriation doctrine governs, but the reality is they know that their neighbor needs some water and they don't have a senior right. So they let their neighbor take some of their water, right? And it's a friendly handshake deal, and it works out really well when you have old families who are there, done it for a long time, but it works. And so you've got to get that written into the in-stream flow appropriation to protect that practice, right? And that's a technique that you can use that a lot of our ranchers, they're busy, they're working, they're not paying attention to this kind of stuff. So you all and we all need to be able to make sure that folks know these filings are coming and they've got to look at.
I typically look at that list at least once a year, if not twice.
Yeah.
It's whenever there's one for Rio Blanco County coming up, or the White River Basin is what I monitor, because I've sent a few on up to T. Wright Dickens, even some where they're trying to do something up there, and he appreciates that. A lot of these folks are not looking up, so it's not my area, but I don't think they're looking, and I just want to make sure that they're looking. So.
Okay. Well, the only thing I got before we do go into just a quick update on Shoshone. Where are we at with that?
Well, there's a couple processes moving forward right now. So just background, we're buying this water right from a subsidiary of Excel Energy, and we have a contract to buy it for $99 million. We have to go through an in-stream flow process, so we have to reach an in-stream flow agreement in which the CWCB agrees that they will acquire the right to use the water right. We will continue to own it, but they will use it for that 2.5 miles for in-stream flow purposes. And we spent a long time negotiating with the staff to make that agreement, from our perspective, rock solid, that they have to use it. They have to, they have many in-stream flows they've never actually used, right? We're not going to go spend $99 million and then watch them not exercise and watch the water go eastward to the divide. So we spent a lot of time negotiating the terms and conditions. Last week, we commenced a formal process under the statute to acquire, or for them to acquire that right to use it. That is a 120-day period under the statute from last Wednesday. That puts us at their September meeting. And of course, when we did that, the several Front Range entities who have Trans Mountain diversions above us got upset, claims of enlargement, that we're enlarging that water right. For those of you who've ever been in water court, when you change a water right, water court's obligation is to make sure that A, you don't enlarge the water right, and B, you don't injure anybody else on the street. And so their opposition seems completely bizarre to us at the in-stream flow process, because there's no way we can enlarge the right and injure them. But what we think is driving it is that if they can diminish the amount of the in-stream flow, and it's a huge water right, it's a combined water rate of 1,408 CFS. And if they can diminish that right and make it smaller, then we end up with less protection for Western Colorado, and they end up with what we call a windfall. They get extra water. All of their transbasin diversions were built knowing Shoshone was online. They were all modeled to know that they could get the yield that they needed and paid for and filed on based on the Shoshone call being in place. But if they can diminish that in-stream flow to a point where they get just better yield for their systems. And so it's really a kind of an existential fight about a resource that we believe belongs in Western Colorado. They believe it belongs in the Front Range. Trying to navigate that through politics of the CWCB is where we are right now. We will continue to do so. We think legally speaking, we are on the right track and the right foot. We're also raising the commitment of $99 million from a collection of sources. The day we signed the contract back in December of 23, our board voted unanimously to put $20 million into towards that purchase. That was because voters like yours here in Rio Blanco County approved our tax increase back in 2020. We identified the Shoshone project as one of the projects that we would spend money on. We put in 20 million or committed 20 million that day. A month later, at the end of January, the CWCB board voted unanimously to recommend $20 million in the projects bill, which they do annually, have this CWCB projects bill. Went to the House and the Senate, where it passed one chamber unanimously and the other had 2 votes against it. So very popular project. That's 40 million. We have since raised in commitments from local entities on the main stem of the Colorado River about $17.2 million. So that's everything from really tiny, like the Debec soil, or not soil, Debec conservation.
Man, you were good.
Conservation group, and then but also big ones from Garfield County at $3 million, from Mesa County at $1 million, from Eagle Summit Grand. It's one of these projects that's fun to work on because it crosses all the political divides. We get both recreation and environmentalists. We get industry. We get ag. Everybody going in the same direction. Major ditch companies and ditch entities have all contributed money as well. We went to the federal government, and they had an IRA offering late last year. Applied for $40 million. The last day of the Biden administration, they issued the $40 million award to us. The next day, when President Trump stepped in, it was frozen. It still remains frozen at this point. We continue to work with the current administration, the Interior. They're still staffing up Interior right now, so we're waiting for that to finish. But we're in touch with them on a weekly basis. We're talking to them. It is it was awarded through a bill that was a cram down by one party, and so the other party is upset, right? I mean, I try to stay out of partisan politics. You got to understand what's going on, right? So making sure that the current administration understands that their priorities, I don't mean to sound crude about it, but their people benefit from this water right. And in fact, it helps all of Western Colorado to have this protection. It's a good thing to be there. So it helps our rural communities that take water directly out of the river for drinking water because of water quality issues. It helps our agriculture be able to grow stone fruit and grapes down in the Grand Valley. Water quality helps all sorts of people up and down. But the recreation economy is no small thing on the Colorado. It's $4 billion a year, right? That's a number that really matters to the people we represent. I think we'll get there. If we don't, we'll figure out another strategy and we'll get that 40 million somewhere else. So we're very close, and we think we appreciate. I think you all, as part of the Western division of CCI, wrote a letter of support. You joined it, and I really appreciate that. It means a lot to us and certainly meant a lot to the state and the feds to know that we have this broad support. So we appreciate that. It's one of those things where I will tell you that the Shoshone effort has led our strategic planning process in the district recognize that we have to find projects like that in every basin where we can work with local constituents to create projects that benefit the entire basin, right? That protect the basin from parties that want to take water out of it, from changing flows in the rivers, from how do we protect your ability to develop? And so we will be, as our board is considering our strategic plan in July, and we as a staff are getting ready to implement that. You will be hearing from us about, in the beginning stages, what projects are there that we can work on. We have an idea of a few of them. We may have heard about some of them. We may even have funded some of them. So we understand that, but kind of looking at it basin wide and understanding what the needs are here in the White River Basin, Yampa, that's really important to us. But I think the next three items that I think you wanted to talk about, we believe they probably involve attorney, legal advice and negotiation discussions, and would recommend that we consider inviting us into an executive session to talk about. That's up to you.
So just anything else that we don't know, that we should know before we do that?
I think, Andy's mention of our proposed strategic changes in our strategic plan, development of that. It's just something that we're looking forward to at staff level.
It's it's interesting. I come from the government world, so strategic plans have often be like things that gather dust on the shelf. So I will say that we are doing our best in this process to have something that really helps our staff understand the importance of serving constituents, making huge difference. And I think the River District is one of those entities that has a really energized, really amazing staff, giving them that commitment to in the direction to help be here to do what we're paid to do by you and your taxpayer. That's our goal. So the one thing I would say is for you and any of your public, if there are things that we are missing or we are not doing, or things that look like they're harmful to the interests of Rio Blanco County, please don't stew on it. Call me. Call Peter. Like we work for you, and we understand that. That's our goal, and that's always top of our minds. So let us know how we can serve that.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
I have his text number just for the record.
Okay.
And I even responded.
He did at 8:30 Cardinal 9 last night. So thank you. I was not really expecting that. So thank you. So,
All right, we will move on to line item 5.
Madam Chair, I would move that we go into executive session pursuant to 24-6-402 4B for the purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions regarding the Colorado River.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion from either of you on that? John, will you please call the roll?
Critchfield.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes, and we will move into executive session. We'll let you know what time, Sean. Thank you. The work session is adjourned at 12:27.